Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are deconstructing a pretty provocative piece from the Appalachian Guerrilla. It puts forward this really radical theory. What if the main force driving modern American politics isn't what we all think it is?
Right out of the gate, the author hits us with this line, a phrase they say comes from old MGTO circles and even channels Malcolm X. It's a powerful opener, and it's meant to immediately signal that we're about to hear an argument that really pushes back against the usual narratives. Okay, let's dive in.
So, to really get a handle on this thing, we're going to follow the author's logic here in 5 key parts. We'll start with what they call a misdirected backlash and follow it all the way to their final call to action.
All right, first up. The author kind of sets the stage by talking about what they see as a recent spike in right-wing anti-Semitism, and they frame it as a direct reaction to some recent geopolitical events and how the U.S. government has responded. But here's where it takes a sharp turn. The central claim is that all this anger, it's completely misplaced. The author argues that blaming Jewish people for the actions of, in their words, our government, is a huge misdirection. And, according to the author, this is not some new problem. They're pointing to these really deep institutional issues, arguing that old policies, say from the Cold War, act like these legacy programs in a computer, just kind of running in the background and causing all sorts of unexpected problems generations down the line. And that right there brings us to the absolute core of this piece. The author basically redirects the spotlight away from Jewish influence and points it at a totally different cultural source, one they claim is the real driver of America's modern problems.
So this is the crucial point. The piece suggests the real conflict is between what it calls the collective nature of the Jews and an outgroup bias that's just inherent to Anglo-Saxons. The real ideological engine behind today's issues, what the author just calls liberalism, is presented as the cultural inheritance of Puritan Anglo-Saxons. Now hold on, because to even begin to follow this line of thought, we have to get on board with the author's very, very specific definitions. They are not using words like Anglo or Jew in the way we might normally think of them. So let's unpack exactly what they mean. So when the source says Anglo, they don't mean all white Europeans. Not at all. They're talking specifically about the cultural descendants of the English Puritans. The classic WASP. And what's really interesting is that this definition apparently includes the Irish of Boston and New York, but specifically leaves out groups like Italian Jews, the Scotch-Irish, and Germans.
And this, right here, this lays out the central clash in the author's theory. On one side, you've got the Puritan Anglo way of thinking, totally individualistic, built on that core belief that if you just work hard, you will succeed. And on the other side, you have what they're defining as the Jewish ethos, collective, tribal, and focused on taking care of your own people first. Okay, so with those specific definitions locked in our minds, the source then tries to draw this direct, unbroken ideological line, starting with the Puritans back in the 17th century and stretching all the way to the progressive movements that we see today. So in the author's telling, there's this very clear historical path. It kicks off with the Puritans in the 1600s. They become this powerful merchant class, getting involved in things like the slave trade. Then their religion morphs into a more general American Protestantism. And from there, according to this argument, a split happens that Protestantism, which leads directly to modern progressivism. The author uses this historical claim to really hammer the point home. They say emphatically that the things we see today, and they give examples like trans pastors and drag queen story hour, are the logical conclusion of this Anglo ideology, not a Jewish one. It's liberalism run amok, as they put it. So after all that, what's the big takeaway? Well, the author wraps it all up with this really potent family metaphor. It's their way of explaining the current political anger and what they think we should do about it. The argument basically frames the American people as angry kids who are lashing out at the wrong person. It's asking us to step back and really reconsider who's truly at fault for the way things are.
So in this analogy, the parent in the house is the dominant cultural ideology, Anglo-liberalism. It's the one setting all the rules. Then you have the favored sister. This represents the Jewish collective, which the author claims does really well under the parent's rules and gets all the attention. And finally, that leaves the angry child. And that's the American people, who are furious at the sister instead of looking at the parent who set up this whole unfair dynamic in the first place. So the author's conclusion is a straight-up call to action.
It's a plea, really, to get off what they see as this destructive, almost anti-human path of liberalism and individualism. And, in their words, get back on the human train of community and looking out for each other. And so the piece leaves us with this final, very provocative thought. It frames the central conflict of our time not as just some political disagreement, but as a fundamental choice between two totally opposite ways of life: radical individualism versus deep-seated collectivism. The author is adamant that a choice has to be made, so the question is, what does that choice mean to you?